Hiya, it's Liam here. Just a quick one before we get started. You can now support America at History via the link at the bottom of the show notes. So individuals can give us a one-off tip, or from just 150 a month, you can support the show monthly. Or if you represent a university, a college, or a higher education institution, you can now become an academic partner too. All of those details are in the bottom of the show notes. So check that out and enjoy. With reaction and insights to the biggest stories and breaking news from the USA, and a little bit of history thrown in. This is America, a history in the making. Hello and welcome to another episode of America, a history in the making. We are recording this on Friday, the 25th of October, 2024. So now we're talking a matter of days rather than weeks and months as we head ever closer towards the US election. And I'm joined by some very special guests today to talk a bit more about what it's actually like to be an American and to be voting in the election from abroad as well. But first, a stalwart of the show. You've heard her many times, and of course, we're getting her back for this as well. Emma Long from UEA, welcome.
Hi, Liam.
Hello. I don't need to do the whole long introduction for you anymore, do
No,
I?
no, you really don't. I'm going to be speaking very little today. Regular listeners will be most grateful to hear.
Yes. But I'm sure they won't be grateful. But yes, that is true. But I'm going to throw now to a couple of guests that we've roped in to join us today, which I'm very excited about. And I'll ask you just both to introduce yourselves in turn. Henry.
Yeah, so hey guys, my name is Henry. I'm a current junior at Dickinson College studying political science and American studies. And I'm currently at UEA for a semester at a very, interesting time in American politics.
It is a very interesting time, and we'll talk more about that today. And McKenna.
Hi, I'm McKenna. I'm a sophomore at Dickinson College. I'm originally from Chicago, studying politics or political science and philosophy, and I'm here at UEA for the year.
Nice. And so, just to clarify for anyone that didn't quite get that, Henry and McKenna are both at UEA. They are living in the UK right now. But to confirm, you're both registered voters in this election.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what it's actually like to vote in the election because us Brits sit here on the podcast week in, week out, and it's very easy for us to talk about the issues in America because, we're not directly affected by it, right? So I'm really keen to kind of get your thoughts on what's happening here. Firstly, what was the process like for you both registering? Did you do that in the States before you came over?
Yeah, so I voted in Massachusetts. I'm from Boston, and I filled out a mail-in ballot absentee form over the summer, and they shipped the ballot over, and I just kind of completed it in my room, and then sent it back. It's a little stressful. Like I worry they're gonna lose my mail or something, but
Mm.
hopefully it gets there.
I'm assuming you need to allow for a little bit of leeway just for the airmail.
Yeah,
Yeah. But what's the cutoff point for sending in your mail-in vote?
I believe for me, I think November 5th. It has to get there by November 5th.
Right. Okay. So you've got until actual election day for it
Yeah.
to arrive. Cool. Okay. McKenna, what about you?
Yeah, so registered to vote in Illinois like around my 18th birthday. I have like those parents that are like this is the list of things that you get to do when you're officially an adult. So voting was on there, registering to vote was on there. And then yeah, I filled out like my federal postcard application to vote abroad over the summer. Got an emailed ballot, had to go through like a weird printing process and get a specific envelope for it. But yeah, mine had to be for Illinois, it's like postmarked by November 5th, but you have like 2 weeks ish after that date for it to like actually get there and go through the whole process. But
Mm.
it was a lengthy process, but a worth it process.
Yeah, well, I mean, congrats to both of you for doing that and for putting the effort in to actually vote. I mean, there's a lot of Americans that still don't do that, even when they're still in the country, they still don't vote. I mean, Emma, actually, to just bring you in, we've talked a lot about the political process and the election process. Do you think that kind of enthusing people who consistently don't vote could be a big difference maker in the election this year?
This year, yeah, I mean, it certainly looked like that. Sort of when Joe Biden stepped down and Harris stepped in, there was this kind of wave of support, particularly from groups that we haven't seen voting in large numbers before. Whether that's going to hang on, it's difficult to say. Polls are telling us different things. But I was interested, Henry and McKenna, in what you were saying, because actually we've talked a lot on the podcast about the fact that that voting is a state level system, right? And that it's one of those things where you see that the US is a federal system. And it's interesting that Henry, yours came by post, and you did that by mail, and McKenna, yours came electronically. So you're already seeing, like, just with a couple of examples, what we've been banging on about, or what I've been banging on about, at least for months, which is the importance of understanding the processes as at state level rather than as a single federal election. And did you guys get ballots for like the lower down races, so for House and Senate and any kind of local initiatives as well through that process?
Yeah, mine went, I think, all the way down to my county. So, like,
Okay.
there was federal, then state, then county. I think my city, like, the city I'm from, does their elections at midterm. So I went down to county.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, mine just went down to names I didn't even recognize at that point. So I'm figuring that was a lot.
Yeah,
I
we've talked about how many elections can appear on this, or how many races can appear on the same ballot, right? And you get sort of exhausted once you get partway down the list. So interesting. Okay.
it kind of blows my mind in the UK because like when we have the general election, we literally it's such a short ballot paper. It's like, okay, it's the one vote. What party are you voting for? You tick a box, bam. From the impression I've got, like in the States, you get like pages and pages of like different votes, right?
Yeah, a lot of research. Yeah,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
all these candidates at various different levels.
But like, how much research do you feel like you need to do before an election? And do you bother?
I feel like federal is pretty blaringly obvious, at least like presidential. Like
Yeah.
people know, I'm pretty sure, just like based off what they see in the news. I think as you go down the line and you start to get those names that are like, who are these people? Then you start to like do a little research. I know some people who will literally like make pro con lists, and then I know some people who are like, I like this person's name better, so I voted for them. And I'm like, oh, that's a weird reason, but okay. So yeah, it definitely varies, but you should do your research.
Yeah, of course. But do you think though that once you get to those like lower, the sort of the bottom end of, those ballots, that's where people start to vote by party rather than by individual, because it's really easy to just decide that you're either leaning towards Democrats or Republicans, and then that sways who you vote for, right?
Yeah, as someone who does actually do that, vote by party, at the end, I think it's kind of interesting because my state is generally very democratic, very blue, very left. So it's kind of, there aren't many races that are necessarily that competitive at that level. So, a vote for a Republican in some races in Massachusetts, it's just dropping like a drop of red and like a sea of blue, you
Yeah.
know?
But do you think then that there could be an instance where, let's say, there was a really strong Republican candidate that, because of potential apathy among Democrat voters who might think it's just, a sure thing anyway, that it creates an opportunity where there might be a really strong candidate from another party to actually sneak in and cause a surprise one year?
I think my county is very red. Illinois is a completely just very blue state.
Hmm.
My county actually leans more red. So there have been times where like those races have been contested, and I have seen like good candidates go down just because people are like, well, I'm not going to change Illinois by voting red, so I'm just voting blue for the heck of it. And it has left some like pretty races that were really strong, like just one person because of their party loses out. So I have seen that even in like a weird area of Illinois that's very different from the rest. People just sort of lose hope
Yeah.
in ever changing the color, so they just go with it.
And how
Mhm.
much of a sure thing do you think this is, though? Like, because from the outside, we kind of reduce the election to just 7 swing states, and that's all it comes down to. Is it is it really like that, or is there actually a chance that any of the other 43 could go a different way?
I think producing a swing state takes it's a very laborious process with a lot of demographic changes that are gradual over time.
Mm.
And you'll kind of just see like patterns of voting, through various elections, and then I guess all of a sudden like there's a new swing state. But I feel like it's usually never very overnight. Like you can kind of count the trend.
I'm interested in your experiences. Again, lots of talk about the swing states, but neither of you are from swing states, right? So you're in states which tend to reliably go one way, particularly at national level. There's a lot of discussion about, you know, in the literature, right, there's a lot of discussion about people feeling demotivated, that they don't get any attention from candidates because they're kind of, particularly, I guess, in your cases, from the you don't get a lot of attention from either candidate, either because the Democrats think they're going to win or the Republicans just don't think they're not. I mean, is there a sense that you feel left out of the debate, or do you just not want to be bombarded with all the stuff that's going on? I've got lots of friends who live in Wisconsin and they're just like, we're ready for it to be over. We're just done.
I think most people would feel that way, but I have this gut feeling that the vice presidential nominee changed that, at least for Illinois, because we're in the Midwest with Minnesota, with Wisconsin, with all those guys. So when Tim Walz, which Minnesota's incredibly blue, like not changing anytime soon unless something major happens, like that was like a big wake up call to all of like the pretty set in stone states that like we actually do have some pull in this election. And although the swing states are going to be where the election essentially like turns, it's definitely interesting to feel like back in the conversation as of just very blue state because yeah, nobody really comes to Illinois. If they do, they come to Chicago to like rally the democratic forces and then leave. So, but yeah, I think definitely with Tim Walz, we've re-entered the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, you sort of got Obama. You got a bit of a bump, right, with Obama being from Chicago, and then otherwise it's that sense of that Midwest grouping, right, where
Mm-hmm.
people sort of treat everybody the same, where actually it's not. But how about you, Henry? I was going to say you're sort of similar kind of state politics, right, but on the coast.
Yeah, Massachusetts is unbelievably blue. Um, I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I think it's interesting because we go to college in Pennsylvania, which is arguably the biggest one, and you can kind of see the intensity in the politics there.
Yeah, I have a friend who's predicting that whichever way Pennsylvania goes will sort of flag up the way the election's going to
Yeah, I think
work
that's
out.
been a trend over the past few of them.
Yeah.
Henry, I'm keen to know what the sort of reaction was within Massachusetts when Kennedy sort of joined the presidential race, because I'm going to make an assumption that if there was going to be sentiment towards a Kennedy anywhere, it will be in that part of the country. Did he ever have momentum?
Oh man, I mean, love the Kennedys, right? But I feel like politically he's a little bit out there compared to the rest of them in terms of his policies.
Yeah.
I had a funny story though. I was at the dentist once, and I told her I was a political science major, like my dentist, and she had, my mouth forced open. She's like, "Oh, who are you voting for?" I can't talk. And then she was like, "Oh, this is why I'm voting for RFK." And then explained it to me for 20 minutes, and I couldn't get a word in because she was like working on my teeth. So I mean, that's a standalone instance, but I feel like people definitely consider it as an option, especially when Biden was in the race, because I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of doubts about Biden's age. So I think he was a decent alternative, but I didn't necessarily notice a large surge because, his policies are a little bit more, I guess, libertarian right leaning than traditional Kennedys.
Yeah. Interesting that he then did go on to endorse Trump,
Yeah.
which feels like a bit of a stab in the back to everyone who historically sort of backs the Kennedy family, right?
Hmm.
I'm really actually interested to know about your sort of experiences, sort of, I guess, engaging with issues around the election and as a voter from abroad, because as we sort of touched on, the 43 out of 50 states tend to get a little bit ignored anyway. And not only are you from one of those states, but you're living a few thousand miles further away as well. How engaged have you felt in this election cycle?
Feel like it's been a weird mix of like literally feeling like I'm getting nothing and then like hearing things when I'm on the phone with my parents. I'm like, when did that happen? And but then also feeling like oddly just more knowledgeable because I'm hearing it from an outside perspective. Like it's very echo chamber when you're just like being a poli sci major. I'm like a part of my campus like politics. things like that, it becomes very just like Americans talking to Americans about American politics all the time. So it's interesting actually to get a perspective of like, no, like things that are happening in your country are crazy, though you might not realize it. This is insane. And I'm like, yeah. So like it's a weird, like I do feel a little out of the loop, but like doing what you can, like doing the research, reading the news, but then actually getting this like really valuable perspective, even though I'm away.
Yeah, I feel like I felt more obligated to keep, in the loop with news and research and stuff because I do feel disconnected in the sense. And I think it's interesting. There's always kind of a tension in the air, before an American election, and it's kind of funny going outside and it's sort of like, oh, there's an election in America. I mean, it's obviously important on a global scale, but I feel like there's like an intensity that's kind of not there.
So when I was in America and I was looking at like the BBC News website, for instance, I got the international version of BBC News, not the BBC.co.uk editorial that I'm used to. And there was a very different vibe as to how they presented UK news to the rest of the world versus how they did it on their own UK website. Are you finding that sort of the content that you're seeing is a little bit differently curated from abroad?
I think I don't know if I could answer that question because I've been kind of curating American articles, because maybe that's what makes me more comfortable unconsciously. But I think
Mm.
it's interesting, talking to other people. I think that like McKenna said earlier, I think you kind of get that perspective from, interacting with people, and we'll have conversations about the elections and they'll ask these questions, like we're doing right now. And I think that's kind of where you notice, the sort of difference. There's like a much larger curiosity to it
Mm.
instead of like a kind of like, oh, this is what's happening.
Yeah, I've a feeling from following them from both sides of the Atlantic that American news outlets don't don't accommodate for the way the rest of the world might want to see their material in the way that the BBC website does, which I guess for anyone listening who doesn't know that, yeah, you get a different version of the BBC website when you're abroad than you do when you're in the UK. I was wondering if you've been surprised at how much coverage there is of it here, and how much people are paying attention to the American election here, because obviously it's a different country. Has that surprised you?
It is so shocking to see. Just because, like, I guess my initial thought is, do we get this much coverage of like UK elections in the US? I'm like, no, like they're not. They don't cover it this extensively, but like it is quite interesting to see how invested people are. But then it like once again pulls me out of like the America echo chamber of like this is because this election matters to a lot more than I think we realize. But yeah, and just in my conversation with other British people, like talking about their politics, like I have asked people who their prime minister is and they didn't know, but then they knew that like Joe Biden was our president, and I'm like, whoa, that was crazy. So it is interesting to see just the amount that like Americans consider like British politics versus the opposite of that. It's pretty shocking.
Why do you think like the rest of the world cares about America so much? From your perspective.
I think it's because it's entertaining, especially recently. I'm taking a politics and pop culture class here. My professor described it as WWE wrestling, especially, with Trump's bombastic campaign style. It's a lot of stunts. It's a lot of, insane headlines. I never know what I'm going to wake up to anymore. From my perspective as an American, at least, I think it's embarrassing, but I can see why it could be fascinating.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with Trump and everything about him because I think internationally, and particularly in the UK, I'm not sure Trump would ever gain the sort of momentum that he's had for like 8 years now, longer in the US, and I'm really interested to know if what the feeling is like on the ground in the US. Are there really that many people that want Trump to be president? I don't get it.
There are. There are. There are, and I hate to say that with like everything in me. I hate to admit that, but there are. And over the summer I canvassed for one of my elected representatives that I work for, but like the amount of houses that were just like decked out in like Trump 2024 stuff, there are people that just regardless of what he says or what he does, they are just with him all the way. So yeah,
Mm.
it's very real. And like sometimes I think that when I'm in conversation with people from the UK, they like genuinely think I'm making it up, and I'm like, no, there's like ride or dies for him that have been ride or die for him since 2016. So, but it's very real.
Yeah, I think the pull of him is that he presents himself in kind of a, I'm a regular guy. I'm not, in the government. I'm not like the Clintons or, Joe Biden. I haven't, worked in the system that is, you know, kind of like big and intimidating. I think a lot of Americans definitely like have an anti-government sentiment.
Mm.
I think it's ironic it's Donald Trump because he's a rich businessman, but I think he kind of appeals to sort of every man. He says what he thinks. He seems very genuine, whether
Mm.
that's a good or bad thing. Um, but I think he appeals to this kind of like, outsider like viewpoint of like I'm not big government, I'm for you. And I think that's why he has a grip on so many Americans.
So this is going to be the first election. I'm assuming that both of you are voting in, right? First presidential election.
Yeah.
So how do you think this whole new generation of voters, which you're part of, could sway the sort of national sentiment? And I guess the bigger question there is, are the issues that Trump is speaking on and appeals to the same as the issues that matter to you two?
I think it'll be interesting to see because not only are we like the like young generation of voters, but it's just completely different from
Mm.
any political like spectrum or scene that our parents would have voted in. I don't think we've ever seen this much polarization or these like characters before, quite frankly, in politics. So it's almost like we're just forging something new completely, like regardless of our age, it's just completely different. And it is interesting to see the issues that Trump talks about because from my vantage point, being a young person, I don't see how those could like forge this new path. Like I'm gonna sound biased. He's taking us back. Like every time he opens his mouth, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm in like the 50s again. It's yeah. So I think being someone who sees this like political scene as a young person as a way forward and then hearing someone talk about wanting to go back is just kind of insane and very unsettling in many ways.
Yeah, I think particularly for our generation, I think the internet has played a big role in, spreading information and our exposure to, misinformation and things like that. And I'm so curious to see like the literature on how, Gen Z and what's before is Alpha, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, like
Alpha's
grew
after
up
you guys.
or after. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see the literature on how that affects, the mentality of voters
Mm.
in a few years when there's a larger sample size.
Yeah, and I think certainly seeing everything unfold internationally, when Harris did officially take over from Biden, there was this, it felt like this renewed energy in certainly the coverage of the election, in this sense that actually perhaps there would be a race, which, you know, felt like. It felt like a foregone conclusion for Trump before Biden dropped out. Certainly, that's the skew of the coverage we got. But then, Harris entered, and there was this sense of optimism and renewed energy amongst Democrats, the likes of which I've sort of compared back to 2008 when Obama ran, and again, it was, very similar vibes that like something was going to change, in US politics. Is that purely just a generational thing, do you think? Certainly when you look at how the Harris campaign has embraced new technology and different ways of reaching people.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a generational thing. Just because there was like when Biden was running, it felt just like old. Like we've seen this before. If you were a Democrat, it felt like you were fighting a losing battle with like nothing to grip onto.
Mm.
And then when like, and there was no outreach either, at least compared to how the Harris campaign is doing youth outreach. There was just like nothing to really hold on to if you were a young person or a Democrat when Biden was running. And now like Harris is really going on with like the TikTok thing, the Twitter, like she's really just going all out with the word getting young people to vote. And you can feel it, like for sure. I feel like I can't go a day without seeing that Kamala HQ like reposted or posted or liked or did something on TikTok and Instagram. But it's also like a nice feeling knowing like this could potentially be the person in the White House who's literally trying to make sure that like people my age are involved, which is a nice feeling.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember, I think that was around the time Trump got shot too. And that was just an insane like couple weeks. And the thing that stuck with me was that the momentum that Harris generated like made me completely forget that like Trump got shot at like a week prior. And yeah, I think McKenna said it well, but I think it'd be funny if we had a president who was, they made like Brad Summer TikTok edits of in the White House. Like I feel like stuff like that like connects to us. And it's definitely in a way that Joe Biden's campaign couldn't. So
Yeah.
it's
It,
fascinating.
it seems important, right? Because if you look at the statistics, people in the sort of the 18 to, depending on which one you look at, 18 to 25 or 18 to 30 category are the least likely to vote, right? And so I think a lot of politicians have sort of traditionally written off that group and kind of gone, well, they don't go out to vote, so we'll make some kind of effort, right, to talk to them so that they don't feel completely ignored, but actually we're going to concentrate on the 30 and older, and particularly older people, which is the same here in the UK. Older people, particularly over the age of about 55, vote much more regularly, and it skews the politics, right? Because they start talking about things like pensions and social security, and I guess in the US, sort of Medicare and Medicaid and those kinds of policies that tend to affect seniors because they're the ones who vote. So it is good. It's sort of good to hear that this is a campaign. If we're not perhaps seeing it quite so much, but this is a campaign that is actively trying to get young people engaged, albeit yes, they want to win, but it's kind of at least they're making the effort, right, to try and find those things that people under the age of 30 care about and say this is your area as well, right? So I hadn't heard I'd sort of seen some of the outreach stuff, but I hadn't heard it was quite as extensive as it is. So
Mm.
it's kind of interesting to hear.
I mean, Emma, we've spoken on a really early episode about like how age matters when we were talking about how presidents are elected and like whether someone's like too old to be a president. It does feel like that's been such a huge factor in this election, and I kind of think the other side of the coin to what you said about that outreach and like um, trying to appeal to younger voters is that it feels like this election has become so much less about the politics and the policies and so much more about just personality and likability. I don't know if you both have found that at all.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And oftentimes I'm honestly thinking about like just like the smaller like day-to-day policies that throughout 4 years of a presidency like you would want to implement because I there's definitely policy in there, but it's major like hard hitters like abortion rights, thing like DEI, thing like SCOTUS too. So it's like heavy hitter policy that
Mm.
it's essentially like which draws the line between the two candidates. And so I have often thought like I do wish there was on both sides honestly more of like the regardless of my party, this is what I want to do. And I do think that Harris has a little bit done that. Trump not so much, but yeah, it's hard to find the policy, but what they do bring up is definitely important, but it's definitely like the heavy hitter right or left stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things I learned studying political science is that not a lot of people understand the intricacies of the federal government. I mean, like I study it and I still kind of have trouble like, figuring out what's going on in there. So I think likability and perceivability as a candidate is very, very important. And it's fascinating, talking to people here. They talk about Harris, and she hasn't had a lot of runway to set the tone in her culture and get people to know her. So a lot of voters like in America and like people I've talked to are like, I just don't really know who she is. So I feel like she's kind of done this like media blitz like recently in an effort to try to cultivate that in like such a short span of time, which has been really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and I think even though that she hasn't had that runway, what I think has been quite crazy to me since she entered the race is that, when you look at Harris's credentials, she's supremely qualified
Hmm.
for the job. You can't really argue with that. But Trump's campaign, maybe it's tempered a little bit, but really pushed this fact that she's just the DEI candidate. She's ticking a box for the Democrats. And I'd like to think that most American voters are as level-headed and as rational as you two. Please tell me I'm wrong if that's not the case, because I don't understand how that sort of messaging breaks through.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. There are very irrational voters in America. It's very unfortunate, but I will say, regardless of my like party line or whatever, I think the Republican attack on Harris that she's like playing identity politics is flat out wrong. Like
Mm.
she's just not. And it's honestly incredible to me how she has created in such a short amount of time, like Henry was saying, she has made like a name. She already had a name for herself, but she's like really pushed herself, really pushed her background, being a prosecutor in California of all places, like really been able to put herself on the platform of like, I, regardless of who I am qualified, and regardless of who he is not. And so it's been really interesting to see like the reaction to that, because how do you react to someone saying like you're not qualified when you're not? And so seeing the Republican response to the like professionalism and background that she brings has been really interesting to see. And then also interesting to see why people then still sort of overlook that and say, whatever, don't care about qualification. I'm going with my gut or with my party. And yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think the Republicans are really trying to play into the culture war aspect of it. You know, you see like stuff like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and things like that. It's kind of like, at least on the Republican side, I think with, recent legalization of gay marriage and a lot of exposure to things like that, I think a lot of people feel threatened in a way
Mm.
to, face something that they don't really quite understand yet. And I think it's fast. Like I saw a Trump ad that said Trump is for us, Kamala is for they them, and then it just showed like a photo of people who are like supposedly non-binary, and it was just kind of. And I saw this ad 3 times in 20 minutes. It was insane. So I think the Republicans kind of playing into that to discredit her is fascinating. I think it's a reflects like a much larger theme in American politics, particularly on the right.
Mm.
Yeah, and that compartmentalization of voters, right, as well.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that kind of language of being a DEI hire, right, is a way of it's sort of a way of Republicans talking about race without being actively seen to talk about race,
Mhm.
right? You know, for all the issues that there are in the US and here too. I mean, we're not singling the US out. We've got our fair share of problems on race and irrational emotional voting and all the rest of it here. So it's not that. But I think the US has largely got past the point where outright racism is going to is going to lose you more voters than it's going to win you,
Mhm.
right, in that context. But there are ways to get around that, and I do wonder if this is part of that, right, of part of a Republican way of trying to appeal to those voters for whom race is an issue, where they still feel, people who feel like they're losing out, and the
Mhm.
issues to do with affirmative action and all of that are part of the reason they are losing out. You can appeal to them without necessarily losing some of your more moderate voters who don't feel that way. Sort of people hearing it what they want to. Um,
Mhm.
But how do you do that whilst also retaining any minority voters that you have? Like Harris has seen a drop in the number of black voters that are saying they're going to vote for her. I mean, it's still a huge majority, but she has seen a small drop. Whereas Trump has seen some gains among non-white voters. So if that's the kind of campaign line they're going down, how on earth are they picking up any non-white, non-male votes?
I think what I think is that, historically America has obviously treated, African Americans very, very poorly, especially through the government. And I think that distrust of government is definitely present in that group, which is fair. And I think, you know, like I said earlier, Trump's position is that outsider candidate is like, I'm not, big government. I'm not the Clintons. I haven't been there for a while. Um, I think maybe that can make an appeal. I don't really have any stats back that up, but that's what I
Mm.
theorize. So it's kind of interesting to see, but I'd like to, get some real statistics on that someday and like figure that out.
Yeah,
And
and I think some of those voters would say we're not just one thing,
mm,
right? Just
Yeah.
because we're black doesn't automatically make us Democrats, or just because we're classed in the Latino voter
mm,
category, that means we vote this way, right? I think the argument I've seen when people have been asked, right? On both sides actually of the political spectrum, when people who are non are from groups that are non-traditionally voting for that group, that's often been the response, right? Don't treat us as one thing. Yes, this is one characteristic, but this is my background and this is what influences that. So I think
yeah,
that would probably, don't as well as that distrust, which absolutely I think is there as well. I think there's that don't put us all in one box type
Mhm.
response as well.
yeah.
I think that's
I
part of it.
I think that's valid, but I also feel like when the party campaigning bring issues of race into the election and try and create some division along those lines, surely not even black voters, but all voters should be saying like this is crazy, like and be sort of turning away from them, and it just doesn't. It just feels like Trump seems to be able to get away with so much more than other candidates are able to get away with in what he says and how he acts.
Yeah, I think it's an anticipation thing. Like at this point in his political career in the US, I would expect nothing less than for Trump to come out and say, like, what did he say a few weeks ago? Like they're gonna choose the white person, or they're gonna choose the man over the woman of color. Like at some points you just go numb, and then it's important at those points to realize that is crazy that at this point we have someone running for president that we're just like, yeah, he's gonna say racist, misogynistic, awful things. Like it's just anticipatory. Like it nothing really shocks anyone at this point, because if you're for him, you're like, yep, I like what he just said. And if you're against him, it's like you're tired. Like, yeah, we know that
Yeah.
you feel that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I read something recently about how I think someone on his staff said that he asked them, why can't you be more like German generals, kind of implying, Nazi Germany. And I read that and I was, yeah, like McKenna said, I read that. I was like, oh, that just sounds like him. And then like 30 seconds later, I was like, that's insane to say.
I mean, actually, on that note, America certainly has had its fair share of criticism for being somewhat self-involved historically. Obviously, from the UK, a lot of the coverage is focused around the impact that Trump will have around the world, particularly his relationship to certain foreign leaders and how that might affect a lot of ongoing conflicts that are happening. Is that a big issue in America? And I guess my follow up, if the answer is no, is should it be?
I think it's coming to the forefront now more than it has in the past. But it's not even like on a party line difference. I
Mm,
think it's because people are realizing, like, why are both candidates not speaking up more about things happening globally? Like it's sort of like either way you fall, I think you're gonna have feelings about it. I feel like the right would probably lean more towards maybe just saying like let Trump handle it, or like he's great at foreign relations, like he talks to amazing leaders everywhere. He's going to keep us safe. He could have stopped the war in Ukraine, like things like that. And the left, honestly, should probably be talking about it more. Like, I feel like we're also pushing away the problem. I think it's coming to the forefront now because it's like people are realizing that there's a whole group of voters that are yet to decide. And
mm.
that could also potentially swing the election based on how each candidate handles foreign affairs.
2020 was interesting because I think the US focus was internal, right? Because of the pandemic that you're talking about and the Black Lives Matter riots, and people wanted somebody who was going to focus internally, right, and solve their internal problems. And just Trump didn't seem to be the person to be able to do that. Ironically, given Joe Biden's foreign policy experience over his long career, that was somewhat ironic. But I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but tell me whether you find this when you talk to people back home. But people are certainly interested internally, right? The issues of the economy and the cost of living and all of those kinds of things, but it's not quite so intensely at home focused this time round as it was in 2020. So whereas sort of 2020, the rest of the world didn't seem to matter that much because, well, we were all locked down, right, by that point. This time it feels like it's there a little bit more as an issue, but perhaps only for voters who are already engaged with those issues. I wonder if it's perhaps not on the radar of people for whom international politics is not on their everyday radar anyway.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's an issue that kind of affects some voters more than others.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't seem to be a big enough issue domestically that it's warranting a lot of airtime. I think one of the debates was it maybe the Harris-Trump debate. There was criticism that they only spent such a minuscule amount of time on foreign policy, and clearly that must mean that they don't think that it's going to translate to votes. And I make of that what you will, I guess. But I guess just sort of wrap this up and bring to a close. And it's something I ask every guest on every episode as we talk about the election. Just to timestamp this once again, obviously we're recording this on Friday the 25th of October, so we're now 11 days away from the election. Based on everything you know and think right now, if you were to put a bet on the outcome, so not who do you want to win, but as of right now, who do you think will win?
Oh
Really
gosh,
tough
that's
question.
that's a hard ball. I'm going to okay. I'm gonna say Harris, and I know that people are gonna say, yeah, you would think that, but I genuinely do think the fact that she has done this much in just the short amount of time, like I really do think she will take every second that she can to get people to vote for her. Like I really do believe that, and I think swing states have shown that they're maybe not as staunchly one way or another as they were when Biden was still running. So I think just the swing that she has made in this amount of time, and the fact that though it's a small period of time, there is a period of time left before the November 5th for the election. I think she has a good shot.
Yeah, I think although Trump's gained some recent momentum, I think I put my money on Harris if you look at factors like the Democrats' performance in midterm elections and the stock market and all the momentum she obviously gained in 4 months. But I think also you can't count Trump out. He's like a roach. It won't go away no matter how much you spray it. So, oh, it's so hard. I would put money on Harris, but I wouldn't be surprised if I lost a few
Yeah,
bucks.
yeah. I think having looked at some of the trends among swing state polls, I'm worried on your behalf that this may actually still go Trump's way. Even though I think I optimistically, Emma, said to you soon after Harris became the candidate that it was becoming Harris's to lose. The momentum seems to have just dissipated a bit. Emma, what do you think?
Yeah, as I was talking to my students in class this morning, basically giving them lots of information from opinion polls and telling them basically to be skeptical about all of them because they've always been so wrong in the past. Um, so I don't know. I genuinely think it can still go either way. I mean, we talk about momentum one way or the other, but every poll is within the margin of error, right? And I
Mm.
think I don't even know that it's necessarily going to come down to anything that either candidate does unless they do something either utterly brilliant or disastrous in the next couple of weeks. I think for those areas, not just the swing states, but those areas where those the voting is more balanced, it may come down to just how people feel on the day,
Which
right?
is
And
terrifying, really.
Yeah, it's great to
yeah,
hear.
but I mean, it's no different for swing voters in other countries, right?
Yeah.
It's not that the US is unusual. about that. It's just that it's a bigger, longer process in the US than it is in most countries. And because the US is so influential in the rest of the world, it has equally big impact on the rest of the world. The US doesn't pay. I mean, I was in the US for the 2019 UK election, and I did see coverage, but not an awful lot of it, and I kind of had to sort it out. But that's because what happens in the UK doesn't really affect the US in a massive way, but what happens in the US, especially at this moment, massively affects what's going to happen with the rest of the world. So we're paying more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick sort of sweepstake to finish off our discussion. How many in days? How long do you think it will be before we actually get a result after the election?
I'm gonna give it, if the election is like 11 or 12, I'll give it 17 days until we know the next president.
Okay.
So you reckon four or 5 days after the election, right? We should have
So,
a result.
Yeah, I'd probably say the same thing. That's gonna be a horrible 4 or 5 days.
gruesome, grueling 4 or 5 days.
Well, it's about what it took last time, right? The election was the Tuesday. I think we got the result on the Saturday,
Yeah.
something like that. So 5-ish days, chance to work its way through, legal challenges to work their way through, and those kinds of things.
Well, I'm going to be optimistic, seeing as we're hosting the live Lasdun lecture 2 days after the election. That my phone will be with me, and I'm really hoping we get a result during that.
While we're speaking.
Yeah, because that would be a nice conversation pivot. But yeah, that's maybe optimistic of me. Right, it's been great to actually chat to the both of you, McKenna and Henry, not least because it's normally just a load of Brits who have absolutely no vested interest in the election. So it's really nice to hear your opinions as people who have been living in the US for your whole life and who are voting for the first time. It's been really insightful. And just thank you for joining the podcast. If anyone wants to connect with you after listening to this, where can they do that? Henry?
I guess my Instagram is just Henry Lease. If you want to do that, I don't check it often, but I guess after this I'll try.
It's okay. Emma's not on social media at all, so having an Instagram is already one up on her. McKenna?
Yeah, my Instagram is Kenny_Anders, KENNIE_Anders 0509. Or I guess my UEA email is just mckenna.anderson@uea.ac.uk.
Awesome. And Emma?
Yes, as regular listeners will know, and as you've pointed out, I don't do social media, so people can find me through the UEA website.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm still hanging on X, which probably shows you my age, via This Is the Hev, so do follow me there, and on LinkedIn as well, which is just my normal name. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and as always, if you could just give the show a follow, every future episode will appear magically in your feed, and that makes us very happy. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye. Thanks for listening to America, a history in the making. If you enjoy the show, please go and check out our main episodes, which drop every Tuesday, and we've linked to some relevant episodes in the show notes for you as well. Remember also to visit our Patreon page, where you can support our show. For just a few dollars a month, you'll unlock some awesome perks, and it helps us to keep the show going, which we really appreciate. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, in Pod We Trust.